welcome everyone. Thank you for carving out some time in your Saturday morning. It's a beautiful day. We'll be together for approximately an hour and a half for this training session to help us launch our Catholic legislation promotion project. So thank you for your time. I'd like to take just a moment to introduce our presenter, Steve Pehanich from the California Catholic Conference. And he may share a little bit more about his role with the conference in a few moments. And his colleague, Kristen Morrow, is also here. We are taping this presentation. KNXT will be creating a YouTube video that we'll be able to continue to use throughout the diocese as we launch this project, but then continue this effort to get all of our parishioners connected with the Catholic Legislative Network. My name is Teresa Dominguez. I serve as the Chancellor for the Diocese of Fresno. Present here this morning are representatives from some of our parishes. The remainder of the diocese will be trained throughout the upcoming week in various regions by local presenters. So welcome everyone from your various parishes. Also present is some of our members of the newly formed Committee to Serve Social Justice Ministry to guide and direct underneath the directions of Bishop Armando Ochoa. Our committee that is forming and has already done some work over the past year will be referred to from this day on as Joy and Hope for the Third Millennium. So you'll be hearing more about that as we continue on. So again, thank you for your time and welcome, Steve.
Thanks, thanks very much, Teresa. Appreciate that, and I really appreciate the Diocese of Fresno and Bishop Ochoa allowing us to come in here and to explain what the Catholic Legislative Network is. And you know, we have colleagues around the country that have legislative networks in other states, and none of them are as big as California. And it's because our bishops here in California have allowed us to come into the diocese and do that, to do some recruiting. So that's what we're going to explain a little bit about today. So Teresa wanted me to explain a little bit about the California Catholic Conference. It's very simple. We're the office in Sacramento that represents all the bishops in California. So we have some lobbyists. One of our lobbyists is doing the Spanish session on the other side of the hall here. We have lobbyists that specialize in life and family, education, and economic justice issues. And so we're in Sacramento trying to talk about Catholic social teaching in the middle of California. Sometimes it's a very challenging environment. And that's one of the reasons why we need the legislative network. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But only the larger states have Catholic conferences. So Illinois, New York, Pennsylvania would have a Catholic conference. In some place like Nevada, they don't have a Catholic conference because they have two bishops. So they just kind of call each other on the phone. Here in California, what we do, we have 24 active bishops. We have 2 archdioceses. So as you could imagine, trying to, if each one of those had to have an office in Sacramento, it would be a tremendous waste of money. So they've gotten together and hired, we have a very small staff in Sacramento. So that's what we do. If you've heard of the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops, USCCB, it's just, we're the state version of that. So anyway, what we have here, what we want to talk about today is recruiting members for the Catholic Legislative Network. And we have what we call our Life and Dignity Sunday. And what we've asked you here today is to explain how you can take Life and Dignity Sunday, how you could do it in your own parish. We're not talking about rocket science here. We're asking you to take some cards at every Mass, get somebody to speak at every Mass, fill out the card, and then collect the cards and send them back to us at the conference. It's a fairly simple thing, but what we're trying to accomplish today is explain to you a little bit about the network. So when you go to the parish, that you could answer questions from people. We have already talked to all the priests in the diocese at their priest study days. So none of them should be surprised about this. They should all be aware of it. However, I think I was like I know I was the very last speaker on 3 days of study days. So if they don't remember, if your pastor doesn't remember, give them a break. You know, it's like I was, you know, I've been the last speaker before lunch or the speaker after lunch, you know, but I've never been the last speaker of a 3-day conference. And to have somebody pay attention then was remarkable. So they're all aware of it. They should be receiving stuff in the parish shortly, and we'll go over that. But what are we doing with the network? It's a grassroots email advocacy network. Basically, what we want to do is try to get people to sign up to the network so that we could send them information about what's happening in the state of California, primarily the state of California, but we also do national and international news as well. It's educational, it's very educational. What we're trying to do is to have people understand, take the gospel and apply it to their daily lives as they live in community. We're not trying to tell people how to vote. That's one of the first questions you'll always get. Oh, the bishops want to try to tell me how to vote. Well, if the bishops told you how to vote, you wouldn't listen anyway. And that's one of the things about Catholics. Catholics have to think for themselves. Our church is very big on that. But you in order to do that, you have to be informed. You have to understand church teaching. You have to apply it within your own community, within your own family, etc. That's where we talk about prudential judgment. The network gives you the information you need to be an informed, faithful citizen. So that, you know, we all listen to cable news, we take out our smartphones and we're, you know, looking at the headlines and stuff like that. That's not enough information to make an informed decision about your community. So what we try to do, and we'll go over a lot more details about this as we move along, but we're trying to help you be an informed, faithful citizen so you can make good decisions as you participate in your community. So it's easy to use, it's easy to customize. We're not telling people how to vote. We are saying you may want to take a position on this. We are making it easy for you to do. But it's not something where we're trying to establish a Catholic voting bloc or something. You know, there is no Catholic voting bloc. We like to think there is, and if you listen to people talk about election news, they're talking about, oh, how the Catholics voted. Unfortunately, the Catholics vote like everybody else votes. And what we're trying to do with the network is to say, you need to go beyond just the headlines. You need to go beyond cable news or your favorite blog or something like that. You need to understand what the church is teaching, what the gospel is saying, and then you need to work out for yourself how to apply that in community. So why are we doing this? I think the simple reason we're doing it is because California is a challenging place. We drove down from Sacramento today, and so we had 3 hours in the car to talk about stuff. And we were comparing how in other states, if you try to explain to them the politics in California, they look at you funny. I mean, it's just a different kind of animal. We are the 8th largest economy in the world. If we were a country, we have places like some of the highest unemployment in California or in the nation is still in California, especially in the agricultural sector down in places like San Bernardino and stuff. We have places as diverse as Fresno and San Francisco. So we have a small little nation here that is very diverse. And we have challenges from, say, the 2008 economic recession we still haven't recovered from. So we have economic challenges. We have challenges, how do we educate our children? How do we provide a social safety net for people without having them become dependent? Why do we spend so much on family planning in California? Why is Planned Parenthood so active in California? And why do they, I mean, to us, it sort of seems like we're always battling Planned Parenthood, you know? But if you go to other states, if you go to Mississippi, you don't have that challenge as much as you do here in California. So we're very unique. And then we have everything new they want to try starts here in California. So what are we having right now? We're having a debate on assisted suicide, physician-assisted suicide. You've all heard of Brittany Maynard. She was a 29-year-old woman who contracted brain cancer and moved to Oregon. She's, you know, it's impossible to listen to these stories without feeling sorry for the people. But contrast that with the 19-year-old college student, I think she was in Kansas or something, that wanted to play in college basketball game. She had a brain tumor as well, and she lived her life to the end. So you can't make policy decisions, though, based on, you know, stories. You have to make policy decisions based on what impact it's going to have on the community, on other people. So we're debating assisted suicide, and the proponents bring out Brittany Maynard that everybody feels sorry for, but you can't make policy on that. And so we're in Sacramento, we're trying to point out the policy implications, the dangers for the elderly, the dangers for the sick, that's disabled, et cetera, that this entails. So we're trying to bring a life-giving message to Sacramento, and we're battling a PR campaign, basically, which makes it very difficult. But the people who are sponsoring this kind of legislation would love to get California, because as California goes, so goes the nation. So Oregon's had assisted suicide, for instance, for like 16 years. The rest of the nation didn't follow. But if it happens here in California, you know, you could predict what will happen to the rest of the nation. And then politics has just become just a terrible place. I mean, politics has always been rough. Ask Julius Caesar, you know, et tu, Brute. They used to have, in the early days of the Republic, they used to have a dueling field about 300 yards from the Capitol in Washington. I was telling somebody about that once. I think it might have been in San Bernardino, and somebody from the audience said, they ought to bring it back. But, you know, politics has always been tough. It's always been a blood sport. But it seems to be getting tougher and bloodier now. It seems to be a search for ammunition, for one-upmanship. I just heard a report on the radio this week about 2 Mississippi politicians that committed suicide. And, you know, when somebody commits suicide, it's really kind of a cry for help. But the supposition was that they were just so worried about the politics of the smear campaign. So it's gotten really tough. And that's why, one of the reasons I really like the network, because it provides you with good, solid information, and it doesn't try to play one-upmanship. You're not going to find the Catholic Legislative Network saying this politician is a idiot. You know, we may think that, but we're not going to write that. So we're going to be a lot more reasonable about stuff. We're going to be a lot more objective about the information that we provide you. And you know, Catholics, if you look at poll after poll after poll, Catholics in their political view do not differ from the general public. And I think if you start to look at what Pope Francis has called us to do, what our bishops have called us to do in the past, we need to look more carefully at that. We need our view of society, our operation in society needs to be a little bit different, because we're animated by gospel values, not by values of self-interest or party or other values. Our primary value should be that of the gospel message of Jesus. Now, we're not all going to apply that to the same. The gospel reading, or the first reading the other day, daily reading, was the Acts of the Apostle. It's my favorite. It's one of my favorite readings because I call it the Honda commercial reading, where it starts off by saying the apostles were all in one accord. And, everybody was happy, and it was like they just had the experience of Easter, and everybody agreed on everything. But it wasn't too long after that where Paul and Peter were arguing about whether you had to be a Jew first before you're a Christian, et cetera, et cetera. So Catholics are not going to think the same all the time. It would be dull if we did. But we need to understand what our church is teaching and what the gospel is calling us for, so that we would make better decisions. The Catholic tradition from faithful citizenship. You know what faithful citizenship is? Every 4 years, the bishops of the United States issue a document. And it'll come out this November. It comes out the year before a presidential election. And it's a teaching document for Catholics to understand that it's a moral obligation to participate in their community. Jesus had his apostles, his disciples. He had communities. He went from community to community. He healed people, not so much so that they wouldn't be lame anymore, but so they could be accepted back into community. I mean, that was the message of Jesus. We're not looking for individual self-enlightenment. We're looking to make ourselves and everybody better. Love God, love ourselves and our neighbors. And so the Catholic Legislative Network is just a way to help us participate. It's a way for us to understand the Catholic teaching so that we could participate in community. And then you might recognize this guy, Pope Francis. He's very active in calling for Catholic participation. The gospel message is really clear: feed the hungry, clothe the sick, love one another. And he's mentioned many, many times we need to be involved in politics, in our community, to help make it a better place. But that's not new. People hear Pope Francis, it's like, oh, he's changing the church. No, he's not. Pope Benedict, in Deus Caritas Est, one of his first encyclicals, explained how it was a moral obligation for Catholics to participate. That's been the message of the popes, for a long, long time. And again, it's just derived from gospel values. So it's nothing new that we're being asked to do. What we're doing now is just making it a little bit easier, hopefully, through participation in the network. And it's also part of our United States tradition. And Thomas Jefferson said, this nation is not ruled by a majority, it's ruled by a majority who participate. So if you vote regularly, and we've all had this conversation. Did you vote? No, I didn't vote, so you don't have any right to complain. There are United States senators running for president that became United States senators. Ted Cruz in Texas became a United States senator with less than 4% of the vote in Texas. Now, how could that be? Maybe that is reflective of Texas, I don't know. But it's like there's not enough people participated in that election. I would venture to guess. But we're all called to participate. Sometimes it gets really frustrating. I get these kind of questions a lot. Why should I vote because the courts are just going to overrule? Or they're all corrupt anyway. Or just whatever your favorite complaint about politicians is or about the government. We get that all the time. But if you know the men and women working in government, they're decent people. Your elected representatives come from your community for the most part. There's a couple carpetbaggers we could point to. But they're probably businessmen in your community. They might have been school board members. They care about their neighborhoods and their communities, and they rise further and further up the ranks. One of the problems is that once they get to Sacramento or Washington or wherever, they go native really fast. They get involved in the process, and they tend to forget the neighborhood. Forget the old folks that are, the old gang in the neighborhood. That's another advantage of the Catholic Legislative Network. It's like, don't forget us. You really represent us. There was a very, very promising young Latino legislator from the San Fernando Valley who everybody pegged for leadership positions and leadership position in the state, maybe lieutenant governor, et cetera, and he took his re-election for granted. He took the folks at home for granted, and he lost. He lost to a young Latina. She was like just an activist in the community, and everybody was shocked because he didn't remember the folks at home. And you have to be able to do that. And so the network is sort of a way to help do that. But if we want to influence public policy, sometimes it takes more than just emails from the folks at home. Sometimes it takes professional lobbyists. Sometimes, you could have Bishop Ochoa call up a city councilman and say, our churches are finding in this neighborhood there's a big problem. And maybe that could, create some action. Maybe it's a safety issue, or a traffic issue, violence issue. So community leaders can help change public policy by themselves. But sometimes it takes lobbyists, it takes emails, and it takes the bishops all working together to influence a public policy. And so if we want to change the way our communities are run, if we want to bring gospel values to our state and our nation, we have to work together. We have to work together with our bishops, staff in Sacramento, et cetera. And we have to understand what we're talking about. So, we're not going to we have 11 million Catholics in California. Currently, we have 100,000 members of the Catholic Legislative Network throughout the state of California. I'd love to have 5 million. If you go to someplace, some of these national advocacy organizations like the AARP or something, they have 5 million people. Or maybe they have more, maybe they have 10 million or 20 million, because everybody that joins the AARP, they just put in their legislative network. And sometimes, and I'm not saying the AARP does this, but other organizations may, they'll send an email to your legislator and say, our 10 million members think X. But their 10 million members may not think that. Catholic Legislative Network, on the other hand, you're the one that decides whether to send an email or not. And you're voluntarily part of it. So it's not going to be something that it's going to happen without your knowledge, you have to take a positive step in order to do that. So one of the ideas of the network is we have all 12 dioceses working together. There's 2 archdioceses in California and 10 dioceses, so 12 total. We have areas as diverse from San Francisco, like I said, to Fresno, to San Bernardino. We have parishes up in Northern California that want to separate and create a state of Jefferson. There's 6 counties up there that want a separate state. We have a diversity of opinions in the Catholic Legislative Network, and that's a good thing. But there are certain things that you can cooperate on together. So the example I use all the time of something that's hard for the diocese to cooperate is water policy. Because what you think of water policy differs whether you live north of Tehachapi's or south of Tehachapi's. Now, we could all agree on Catholics that we have a right to clean water as individuals. It's a basic necessity of life. People need water. But our views may be a little different if we're in San Francisco, which has a clean supply of water from Hetch Hetchy, or we're in a community like Fresno that relies totally on agriculture and jobs from the agriculture. So those areas are going to be different. And that's where we as Catholics need to really understand our teaching and work with each other to come up with a consensus. There are other examples where it's easy for Catholics to come up for a consensus. Our opposition to abortion, for instance. That most Catholics understand that. You're going to find Catholics that don't or question it or something. But I think for the most part, most Catholics understand that and they appreciate that. But could you imagine if all Catholics, 11 million Catholics in the state of California were working in opposition? We would have a different situation in the state than we do, you know? So we need to work together on a lot of things. We need to come to consensus on things that are not easy for us to agree with, like water policy. Here's another good example from Fresno. Don't you in this county, you have more prisons? Claude, you would know. Don't you have more prisons than anywhere else in the country? This diocese has? The bishops of the United States are very, very much into restorative justice principles. And so correctional facilities are really important to the economy. There's a lot of jobs in this area and stuff. And so the view of corrections may be slightly different in Fresno than it is in San Francisco. I don't mean to be using San Francisco as an example too often. Maybe I'll switch to someplace else, but you understand what I mean. Catholics could have different views in different areas. And so the network will really try to respect that. Incidentally, if you have any questions, we're going to save them to the end because of the video recording of this, and Teresa will collect little scraps of paper if you have questions. But so if you have anything of them, keep them in hand. So what's the Catholic Legislative Network going to teach about? We're going to teach about basically Catholic social teaching. And what is Catholic social teaching? A lot of people say it's our best kept secret. Have you heard that before? It's like, oh, the Catholics care about other people. Well, and we as Catholics, yeah, we care about other people, but the rest of the world sometimes doesn't look at it that way from their point of view. But where does that care for others come from? Very simply, I mean, Jesus said, love God, love your neighbor as yourself. So Catholics or Christians have always been caring for other people. Do you know in the early days of the church, one of the easiest ways to tell who a Christian was? There were a lot of plagues in the Greek and Roman Empire at the time. Excuse me. Wonderful. There were a lot of plagues at the time, and what would happen when there's a plague? The city would clear out and leave the sick to die there in the cities. But they knew who the Christians were because they stayed to take care of the sick and dying. That was one way you could easily tell who in a town was Christian. So we've always cared for the person, and it's it's a kind of a basic inbred Catholic trait we have. The Catholic social teaching came around at the end of the last century, well, 2 centuries ago now, in the 1890s, when Pope Leo XIII wrote the first, what they call a social encyclical. And what Pope Leo XIII was talking about was the abuses specifically child labor in the Industrial Revolution. Because you'd have kids working for 20 hours a day for a dime, basically during the Industrial Revolution. And their parents were, much better off. You'd have kids as young as 6 working. So the Pope Leo came out with a letter, an encyclical to the faithful about some of the reforms we ought to make in child labor laws and labor laws in particular during the Industrial Revolution. And since that time, popes have come up with, I don't know, maybe 20 different what we would call social encyclicals, dealing with different aspects of life in the world and how the church encounters the world. Those encyclicals, our social teaching has been divided up into 7 sort of themes. Now, in some books you'll see 10 themes, and some you'll see 15. The U.S. bishops use 7 themes. The first theme is life and dignity of the human person. And pope after pope, bishop after bishop, you'll understand the most important thing is life. The right to life is the most important thing, because none of the other rights have any significance if you're not alive. And that's become the significant issue of our time, especially here in the United States. So life always comes first. In a lot of my presentations, I'll put that life in red print, because when you were young, or I guess they still do it, do you have Bibles now that have everything Jesus said is printed in red? You have that? And people say, pay attention to what's in red. Well, oftentimes I'll put that in red. So pay attention to that. That's where everything starts. We have priority areas of legislation that we follow in Sacramento, and they all start with life. That's the most important one. But life and dignity, we care about the baby in the womb, and we also care about the baby once he or she gets out of the womb. So that's why we want to emphasize both the life and dignity. We're called to care about life from natural conception to natural death. And, as I was saying earlier, in California, we're always challenged by that, and I think we always will be. The second sort of theme is our call to family and participation, community and participation. If you have a child in RCIC, what are they always talking about? The church, the family is the first church. So we are called to care for families. We are called to participate in our communities, make sure other people can participate as well. We have itchy finger there. We have an option for the poor and vulnerable. And why do we have an option to the poor and vulnerable, other than the fact that Jesus had an option for the poor and vulnerable, and which ought to be enough, I think. But, Jesus always hung around with those on the margins of society. The particular parish I go to, we have our front row is reserved for the disabled people. And I love at Mass, you get all these people that it's like, I look at them and say, Jesus would have loved it here. He would have just loved to have all these people around that. So those vulnerable people are important. And part of the reason we have a particular emphasis is on poor and vulnerable is because very few other people do. In Sacramento, we're one of the few organizations that lobby for the poor. You have some other organizations that touch on the peripheries, but not as much as the California Catholic Conference does. Why is that? Because if you're rich and powerful, you could afford to hire lobbyists. If you're poor and vulnerable, you can't necessarily afford to hire them. And so, Jesus told us to care for our neighbor. He was always caring for our neighbor. I think that's, a pretty clear priority of the Catholic Church. You can have a lot of disagreements on how that's done, and we do. We have plenty of disagreements. Should you have entitlements? Should you have this welfare program? Should you have this assistance programs? You get lots of, even among Catholics, you get lots of disagreement. But we shouldn't disagree about the principle. The only thing we should disagree about is maybe how we enact that principle. And then, especially as Christians, we should be able to come to an agreement as how we do that. Another thing that the social encyclicals emphasize is rights and responsibilities. A lot of times we tend to focus on rights. You have a right to education, you have a right to health care. These are basic, you have a right to clean water. These are basic principles of Catholic teaching. You have a right to all that stuff. Why do you have a right to it? Because you have a responsibility to provide for yourself and for your family. And if you don't have a job, you can't fulfill that responsibility. So we have a certain amount of responsibility to help people fulfill their responsibility. But a lot of times when people talk about Catholic social teaching, they emphasize the rights and they forget about the responsibility. The reason we have the rights is so that we can fulfill our responsibility. The dignity of work and the right of workers. We would not have a labor union movement in this country if it wasn't for very active priests in the 1920s and 1930s. And those priests at the time were responding to the encyclicals, the social encyclicals that talked about the danger to workers and the abuse of workers that resulted in the Industrial Revolution. But it's interesting too, the times have changed. You may have heard Catholic teaching, we often refer to the signs of the times. What are the times now? Well, in the 1920s and 1930s, there were a lot of abuses of workers. My wife got hooked on this History Channel show called, it was all about Carnegie and Rockefeller, the people who built America. And it talked about how a lot of the workers were injured and killed. Well, now we have a lot of labor laws. We have a lot of government regulation that protects on that. And the unions are getting off into other areas. They're getting off into politics and different areas. They're becoming political players. So we need to evaluate as Catholics how much assistance do the labor unions need from us, and where do we need to look where there might be a greater need for us to participate. So, for instance, when you have the United Farm Workers coming out in support of same-sex marriage, which they did, how many farm workers really, is that an issue central to farm workers? It's a political issue. So, you know, basically we need to say everybody has a right to work. Workers have a right to a dignified life, to be treated with dignity. But is it still the same? Do we still need to emphasize the unions like we used to? Or is there a different way to do it? My son-in-law is really big in the firefighters union. And he's like Mr. Union Guy. We are all called to different passions, to different vocations, to different avocations. So it's the same as if we are in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Faithful citizenship says we can be in either party. We could be in a union. We could be in, you know, organizations. What we need to do is bring the gospel values to those organizations that we're in. You know, the same thing with participation in a union or a party. We need to bring gospel values to that, just like we need to bring them to the community. Solidarity. We work to stand side by side with people in need. You know, if you talk to, you know, Governor Brown's big now, you know, Governor Brown was a Jesuit. I guess once a Jesuit, always a Jesuit, always a troublemaker. And he's always talking about solidarity and other principles of Catholic social teaching. So we'll get calls at the California Catholic Conference the governor's starting to talk about such and such. What the heck does that mean? It's some Catholic reference, So it's interesting, but he'll talk a lot about solidarity. And then caring for God's creation is going to be really heated up in the next couple of weeks, because Pope Francis is going to release his first encyclical, and it's going to be on human ecology. So he'll be taking on the issue of climate change. Now, the cardinal in charge of the congregation working on that says he's going to basically say climate change, whether it's man-made or natural, it doesn't matter. We need to help the poor. So he's not going to talk about the science of, the Pope's not going to talk about the science of it. He's going to talk about the effect that climate change has on the poor, on poor nations. So for instance, people don't realize this. Everybody was hoping for El Nino this year, for more rain and into the drought. What El Nino causes here, more rain in California, causes drought in Africa. So basically, the Pope is going to say, we're all united together in this thing. And we need to look at it as a human community, not as individual nations. And so it's going to be interesting. Really comes up with, but it's going to be a big deal in the next couple of weeks. He said he was going to work on it for a whole week in March, and then it has to go through translation. So we're in April now. It should be out by maybe June or so is what he was talking about. In September, the Pope is coming to the United States. He's going to talk to a joint session of Congress, and he's going to talk to the United Nations. And so you could bet this encyclical is going to be a big deal, and he's going to be talking about it. He's probably going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. And it's going to challenge a lot of Catholics. It's going to challenge everybody, but it'll challenge all of us to re-examine our understanding of the environment and the effect that might be having on individuals, and especially people in poorer parts of the world. We're looking forward to the office. We just love controversy, so we're gonna have our fair share of it. But one of the things so those are the themes of Catholic social teaching. So how are you going to find out about the Pope's encyclical? Are you going to read about it in the daily news? Are you going to listen to cable news? Never trust cable news. I don't care what station it is, just never trust it. What we're trying to do as Catholics, okay, the Pope does an encyclical. This would be the Catholic Legislative Network's website. And we will have what we did, for instance, for Deus Caritas Est, when Benedict released that, or Charity and Truth. We had commentary from a Franciscan priest, a Vincentian priest, and a Jesuit about what the Pope was saying in the encyclical. We had information from bishops, different bishops in California, on how they explain the encyclical. That's sort of their job. Their job is a teaching role. And the purpose of an encyclical is for a pope to say to the church, this is what you're going to be teaching about. So it will change the church. It will come down, and it will have an impact on our church. Any encyclical should. It may take a couple years. But one of the things as a Catholic, my wife has this great friend, she's Jewish. And when we go out to dinner, she wants to know all about Pope Francis. She wants to know, why does the Catholic Church say this? Why does the Catholic Church say that? She's probably more Catholic than a lot of Catholics. She probably understands Catholicism better than a lot of. But where are you going to get that kind of information? This is part of the purpose of the Catholic Legislative Network. In fact, it's probably one of the most important purposes, to help understand what the church teaches about certain things. And not just, we're talking about climate change. I can guarantee you when the Pope releases that encyclicals, there are going to be screaming headlines on both sides. The liberals are going to say the Pope is with us. The conservatives are going to say the Pope is against us. You know, there's going to be no surprise. People are going to be really ticked off about that. Before you answer any questions, take a look at the Catholic Legislative Network or any good Catholic source and see what the Pope is really saying. Because it's really going to be different than what the headlines say. And that's what we try to do in the network, is to help explain that, give you different perspectives so that you understand that. How do we do that? So that's the website. We start with the website. And you could see these are the things that are important nowadays that we're working on now. The assisted suicide is really important. We want people to join the network. You can't read here, but this is a whole special section on marriage, the importance of marriage and how marriage is changing and how now the middle class are not getting married. The marriage is becoming a refuge of the rich and affluent. And so that section explores that. This section here explores assisted suicide. One of the things we found when we're talking about assisted suicide, Catholics do not understand what the church's teaching is on the end of life. A lot of Catholics think, well, you have to do everything to keep somebody alive as long as you possibly can. That's a misunderstanding of the church teaching. So we're working on, we brought this up a year ago with the bishops that, okay, assisted suicide is going to be an issue here. And we were expecting a political conversation with the bishops. They did not want to talk about politics. They wanted to talk about the pastoral implications. They wanted us to be sure that Catholics understood what the Catholic teaching on the end of life is. And so you'll find kind of two tracks on the website. We'll talk about the policy problems of assisted suicide, but you'll find a big section called Embracing Our Dying, which talks about the actual Catholic teaching as well. And it's not as simple as a lot of people think. So that's the website. When you join the Catholic Legislative Network, every week you'll get an email newsletter. And this one has to do, I'm going to have to leave the podium, sorry, because I can't see from the side. What is this one? This one has to do with the increased cost of education to children, some information on the policy implications of assisted suicide, what's happening in Sacramento. This is National Marriage Week information. So there's a lot of good information on things that are happening in California specifically, but around the country, important things with the Catholic information, Catholic teaching that surrounds that. Now, we all get a lot of emails, and that's one thing you're gonna get from people when you ask them to sign up for another email newsletter. Oh, I get too many emails. Yeah, we all get too many emails. And I don't really expect that people read this every week. My wife, she says she reads it every week, but I think she's lying. I think what she does is she opens it, she sees the headline, says, oh, you wrote about National Marriage Week. I get a lot, I mean, it's my job, I get a lot of newsletters. I don't open all of them every week. But when there's important things happening, I do open them and I do follow them. And what we try to do is make this short, brief, so you could look at it, say, yeah, I'm really interested in education, or I'm really interested in the assisted suicide debate. And you could read that. We provide, it's short. The staff gets really tired. I keep telling them, remember what Mark Twain said, if I'd had more time, I'd have written less. Tell them to keep it short, keep it succinct, because we know you get a lot of emails and we know you're busy. But this is important information for you to know as well. So people will get, don't feel obliged to read it every week, but we try to make it simple for you, and so you know what's going on. So, and then from time to time, you'll get what we call action alerts. And I think this particular action alert was on assisted suicide. So it's already been voted on in a couple of committees. We try to get people to, we suggest you may want to send an email to your legislator about this. And on something like assisted suicide, we get very good response from Catholics. If we have an alert on abortion or other issues, we get good response. When we get into education, economic justice, you can see Catholics think differently about stuff. But some of the basics, I think they really do understand. So we'll send this email to you and say you may want to take action, but it's always up to you whether that's sent or not. We're not like some organizations that automatically send it for you. You would be surprised, some of the organizations you belong to that might be sending emails on your behalf. The other thing that's very important, you have to volunteer to be part of this network. In some states, they take every parish's email list and they just put it in a network. What we have people sign up. You have to sign up for this. And so we can go into a legislator, and we do. We say all those emails you're getting for people are people who voluntarily signed up for this. These are people that are interested. And that really makes a lawmaker sit up and pay attention. What I love to hear is when one of our lobbyists comes back from the Capitol and says, you know, Senator so-and-so told me he's getting a lot of emails from Catholics. What are you guys concerned about? That's the way it's supposed to operate. Because the combination of people at home who care, who are paying attention to the lawmaker and what a lawmaker does, and the lobbyist on site really makes a difference. When somebody is watching what a legislator does, it's a lot different than, it makes it a lot different situation for him or her. So that's what we're looking for, the kind of operation we're looking for. And we don't send a lot of emails. We're really respectful. There's a woman in my parish on the social justice committee with me. She says, why aren't you sending more alerts? She says, I can handle 27 alerts a day. And I said, I try to tell her, Judy, look, you can handle 27 alerts a day, but everybody else is going to just hit that unsubscribe button. We try not to bother people too much. We try to make sure the alerts are timed to when it's really important. So you're not going to get 27 emails a day. We're going to be really respectful of people's times. So Life and Dignity Sunday. We're going to ask you to help get people to sign up for the network. The easiest way to do this is by using these cards. You have to have an email to participate. And that's really hard sometimes. Some of our parishioners, I've had people say, well, why can't we just have a phone tree like we used to have? And it would be nice in those simpler days. But life is a little bit more complicated. Legislation moves very, very fast nowadays. So on the federal level, you can get a bill that takes 2, 3, 4 years. That's not happening in the state. Everything's got to be done in like a few months during the session. So what we're asking folks to do is asking you to go back to your parish, and on those 2 weekends, one of those 2 weekends, have your pastor, hopefully your pastor, or somebody speak to the congregation about signing up for the network. Now, what you have in front of you is a manual that has bulletin announcements, bulletin inserts, things you could copy and just put in the bulletin, and then a suggested script you could use as well. So we're trying to make it as simple as we can for you. We've selected the 2 weekends so that when we get back 20,000 cards from this, we want to get them all back around the same time, because we're going to use a data entry firm to put these in. And if we're getting in, 5,000 here, 2,000 here, 3 months from now, another 2,000. We want you to try to do it on those 2 weekends. Now, if something going on in your parish, if it's your parish festival, your first communion, something, do it the weekend after, but try to do it within those, as close to those 2 weeks as possible. So have somebody talk, and then have people fill these out during Mass. Don't let them take it home. Because we found that if, I've talked to hundreds of people, said, oh yeah, I'll sign up for the network when I get home. What's the web address? And I've told people the same thing, and by the time I get home, I forget. And so it's important that have them fill out the card during Mass. So what you're gonna do, you're gonna get a box, and these have already started arriving at your parish. The box is gonna look like this. Is this all right if I move? The box is gonna have lovely packing material, but it's gonna have a whole bunch of cards, and we've looked at numbers for your parish and made a guesstimate at how many cards you're going to need in your parish. Teresa will have more cards if you need more, if you think you need more. But you should have plenty. You should have plenty, and you should have plenty left over as well. So you're going to get the cards. You're going to get another copy of this manual that you have here in Spanish and English. Get a couple of really nifty posters to hang around. We have a pretty tight time frame for Life and Dignity because of Easter. We couldn't have the training. I like to have the training a couple weeks earlier than this, but we didn't want to have you come here after Palm Sunday. So count your blessings. You didn't have to come after that. And you'll get a self-addressed stamped envelope with instructions to return to our vendor. And all you have to do is take this to a UPS store. You don't have to pay for it. And these are instructions on how to do it. There's a return label in here as well. So basically, what we're going to ask you to do is, on a particular Sunday in your parish that fits into the life of your parish, pass out the cards, have somebody talk about it, have people fill out the cards, and send them back to us in that envelope. So a lot of times when you volunteer, you're all volunteers, right? Nobody told you had to be here. You're all volunteers. Well, if you're in my parish, pastor says, hey, Steve, you're going to do this? And it's like, of course I will, Father. But unlike a lot of volunteer opportunities in the church, this one is all over. When you mail that envelope back to us, you're not going to have to do this for the next 30 years. So very simple, just kind of get it organized and send it back to us. We will collect all those cards and we'll have a professional data entry person put those in. I can't emphasize enough, during your speech or if your pastor gives a speech, or wherever you have given the speech, tell people to print clearly, because email addresses are very, very unforgiving. So we will have a very high number of cards. We will not be able to read the email address. Technology is very advanced. This card will run through a computer. The computer will scan it and come up with its most accurate projection. But we don't trust computers. So 2 human beings will look at it and verify that the computer got it right, and still we'll get a lot of wrong email addresses. And that's pretty frustrating. Some parishes will check all the email addresses before they send the cards in. It's really nice if you want to do that, but if you got 150, 200 cards, I don't know, I wouldn't want to go ask our parish secretary to check all those emails. Maybe you're a braver person than I am, but if you could look them through, if you know John Smith, and it looks like it's John Smith, Smithy with a Y or something, maybe make some of those basic corrections. Don't try to check all the emails. I thought when we first did this, oh, we'll just fix the emails. And so my email is real easy. It's spehanich. It's my first initial, my last name. But people have the strangest email addresses, and you'd never be able to guess them. So it's really hard. Have them print clearly, and we will do our best to have the machine in person read them. The manual has everything you need: bulletin announcements, vision statement, instructions, etc. It also has this list of your responsibilities as Parish Champions. And this list is pretty much what we've gone through already today. Basically, make sure the bulletin announcements get in, posters are put up, somebody's there to speak on Saturday. Somebody make sure at every Mass, make sure there's enough cards in the pews and pens. Pens or pencils. I think pens work best because the card material, the printing stock we use, I think pens are better than pencils on it. But, just make it easier for people to write. So make sure there's either pens or pencils and enough cards in the pews. Collect them after Mass. Some parishes put them in the collection basket. That's okay, but what I find, if you want to go and get a card out of the collection basket, a lot of ushers are going to say, what are you reaching in there for? So you want to be careful of it. You want to be respectful of that. They could go in the collection basket, and the people who count the money could sort them out for you. Whatever your parish, whatever the custom is in your parish, I went to one parish that said it was very, very active parish, hundreds of families, and they did not follow the procedures. They said, oh, the bishops want you to sign up for something, go in the back there. They had like 30 people sign up. I've been to other parishes that follow the script for exactly. They had like 1,400 people sign up in little parishes because they did it, they followed it, they helped fit it into the life of the parish. So, the scripts, the bulletin announcements are all there. You could probably use them straight, but help them, fit into the parish a little bit too. Make sure that you're not causing problems, that you're not causing heartaches for the ushers or something like that because you're trying to reach into the collection basket. A lot of parishes also will they'll collect the cards on Sunday, and we want you to call Teresa on Monday and tell her how many cards you got. Because we don't have exit polling. We don't have we don't have any way of letting you know how successful the drive was unless you call. So one of the bulletin announcements is you could put into the bulletin the week after, we had 500 people sign up. We had 150 people sign up, etc. Now, this is going to be different because we've done Life and Dignity Sunday before here in this diocese. So if people are already signed up, make sure they understand they do not have to sign up again. So I'm not sure what kind of results we'll get because we already did it once. But it was like more than 5 years ago now. So if you weren't at your parish the day we did the sign-ups, you might never have heard about it. We would like you to go home right now and sign up for the network so you can get a couple of emails beforehand so you can see what's going on in case people have any questions. Every email we send out has an unsubscribe button on it. So if people are worried about that, you could unsubscribe at any time. A lot of people are perfectly happy to give it a try, and that'd be great if they do. So let them give them a try. Assure them they can unsubscribe at any time. And I know that button works because I could see the number of people unsubscribe every time we send something out. Every time we sent out the Christmas card and people unsubscribed. And I think what happens, I do the same thing. It's like, one too many email. I'm unsubscribed from this, I'm unsubscribed from that. However, we actually, when we send out an action alert, we actually get a net increase of people. Because somebody's, we get a certain number that always unsubscribes. But those people that are really passionate about those issues send it to other people that are passionate about it, and they join the network as part of it. So we have pretty stable membership. People do not hit that unsubscribe button very often, but they do occasionally. So you'll find in the manual all this information, all the scripts, et cetera, on returning the cards. Basically, that's a lot of words that say, make sure there's enough cards in the pew, that they're writing implements, and you mail them back to us, basically. So what I want to make sure you remember, stress in your parishes that people should print clearly, especially their email address. Make sure that they know that if they're already a member, that they don't have to sign up. Now, if you're already a member, or if you know somebody is a member, they may be a good person to talk at one of the masses, because they're already aware of it. When I talked to the priest of this diocese a couple of months ago, I had one Monsignor come up to me and say, I love the network. I make sure that all my parishioners are on it. And I said, that's great. What parish you use? What size parish do you have? He says, we have like 14 families. We're in a little mission. Okay. But he loves it. And so, we're never going to get 100% participation, but, this Monsignor looked at it every week. I had some nuns came up to me and said, we use your newsletter to talk about, to use in our community meetings every week. And I thought, thanks for the pressure, sister, So people use them for different things. If you don't get emails, if somebody wants to get it and doesn't get email, a lot of parishes will take the weekly newsletter and they will post it on a bulletin board. They will take our action alerts, and you can click a button, you could print our action alert out as a letter as well. So if somebody doesn't have email, but they want to participate in an action alert, you could print out a bunch of copies for them. So a lot of parishes take what's in the newsletter, and they may take an item and put it in their bulletin for the next week or something. So there's lots of different ways that parishes use it. You'll also, if you need more cards, you're going to want to call Teresa, but you probably have plenty, and you'll probably have a lot left. And you'll notice in the cards you get, there's going to be a little code up here. These are generic cards, but there'll be a little code, and that will help us when we enter the data. We'll be able to tell what parish people are in. But you could save that card. People put it in their RCIA packets. I talk to our RCIA group every year. I get to talk about the 5th and 6th commandment and politics. It's like death, sex, and politics. I get all the great subjects. So a lot of people will put this in their new parish packets, different things. So there are lots of different ways that people use that. But if you don't think you have enough, call Teresa, and she's got a supplier, we'll get you some more. And don't forget to call the diocese. I put that in red because that's really important, so that you know and the diocese knows how well they've worked out. Because it's going to take us, we'll wait about a month to make sure we have all the cards before we do the data entry. And then it takes a couple of weeks to do. So by that time, everybody will have forgotten about it. So if you need more information, and this is all in the manual as well, start with Teresa, but you can call us. That's our website. You can call us. That's my email address, and this is in your manual. Sandra is doing the Spanish on the other side of the wall, And Kristen, this is their third week, so don't call Kristen yet. Or you could give her a week or two, and then you can call her. Then she'll know everything. All right, so that's the rundown. Let me go through some of these questions. Why does the California Catholic Conference not include of bishops? How is the conference funded? The legal title does include bishops. I think it just comes from tradition that the California Catholic Conference is used. I'm trying to think, some other states may use bishops, but most of them just use the Catholic Conference. I know it's kind of confusing, it's a little bit archaic. It's funded by dues paid by each diocese. So it's the participation of all the bishops. And it's the same way the USCCB is funded that way. Will the network be in different languages? I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm sorry I forgot. The newsletter is available in Spanish simultaneously with the English. I'm very proud of this fact that we are the only state Catholic conference that does that. So what we do, the newsletter is written by the close of business on Thursday. We send it to a translator who does it Spanish overnight. And when we send out every newsletter, there's a little button you can hit to see the Spanish translation. Now we don't have, I think the last time I was in Fresno, somebody asked if we had it available in Hmong. It's only Spanish and English right now. But if you go to the Archdiocese of LA, for instance, they have Mass in 43 different languages. And there's no way that we're going to be able to do that. The network should have a search engine. We do on the website. The website has a really powerful search engine that should, and it'll search all the newsletters, the action alerts, etc. Does the Catholic Legislative Network allow a diocese to share local updates about local legislative priorities? Absolutely. So you remember the slide I showed of the 12 bishops, the 12 dioceses. The email names and addresses actually belong to the bishops. They're just kept in, the California Catholic Conference keeps them as sort of a depository, which kind of reminds me of another thing. Your email is safe as safe online as your credit card information is safe online. So I say that half jokingly because there's been a lot of breaches of credit cards. I've had 3 new credit cards in 1 year because I shopped at Target, Home Depot, and then some other random thing. So the information is very safe. It's not sold to anybody. It's not given away to anybody. But it does belong to the bishop. So if Bishop Ochoa wants to send something public policy related to his diocese, he absolutely can. If a group of parishes, say a deanery or something, had a local issue they wanted to, they could absolutely do that. You do that through going through the diocese. You would contact Teresa. And we could filter the emails. So I talked to one parish priest who wanted to know if he could use the network for a problem, traffic problem around his school. He wanted to contact the local city council. And he had like 31 different zip codes in his parish. We could sort by 31 different zip codes, and so we could send an email to all those people in the network in those 31 zip codes. So yeah, it could absolutely be used for local issues, and we really encourage it as well. How did the early church get involved in politics, influence society? Everything you know of was invented by the church, basically. That's a good, that would be a good class in or a workshop in church history to go through that. But we get involved in politics, especially after Vatican II. One of the main documents of Vatican II, the introduction was the joys and hopes, the fears and needs of the people of the world. These are the joys and hopes of the people of God. And Vatican II really called us to get out into the community. So I think the church been involved in politics. Anybody watching Wolf Hall on PBS? It's all the story of Thomas Cromwell and Thomas More, St. Thomas More. and very religious, talking about the history of the church there and involvement in politics. It's a little different there. Thomas More had his head chopped off, but politics is, like I said, has always been a rough thing. So we've been in a history, and it was the church. It was made especially clear after Vatican II, when people when one of the major documents, Gaudium et Spes, talked about how we care about the people of the world. Is there an example when CLN made a difference on a particular proposed bill? We've been operating the network for 7 or 8 years now. We've influenced many bills. One of the very first one we did was help kill assisted suicide the last time it came up. So I'm hoping we repeat that success this time. We've worked on juvenile justice. Claude knows about that. We helped change the juvenile sentencing to life without parole. We've gotten many other pieces of legislation influenced by it, especially with some of the economic justice issue. How does patriotism affect social justice? Patriotism, I mean, we are called to be, to appreciate the blessings we have. So patriotism is not contrary to social justice at all. It's a part of that. But it's not complete self-centeredness either. So we are called to be patriotic. We are called to take care of ourselves, but not to the exclusion of other people. So take individual patriotism. If it's all about us, then we're not caring about other people in our family. If it's like, well, you have to do what I say, you have to do my chores, whatever it may be, that's not right. We have to work together. Same thing as a country. It's not all about this country. We could be proud of our country, we could appreciate the blessings, but it's not all about us. We're citizens of the world as well. So I think Catholic social teaching would say basically that. We all need to work together. That comes into play, especially with immigration. I mean, it's a big deal. I had one woman call me about immigration. She left a voicemail, and she said, "Nothing comes before my country, not even my church." And I couldn't talk to her. I would basically say, you got that, a little bit backwards. Your church kind of informs you and helps you decide how to run your country. But I don't think it should be the first thing that you think of. It should be one of the things you think of. But again, these are like ideas for future stories on the website, actually. In my experience, committed Catholics who are very involved politically also seem to be very anti-immigrant issue. If you thought it was tough with immigration, wait till we get to climate change. G.K. Chesterton, a very famous Christian writer, talked about the radical nature of following Jesus. And believe me, it is radical. And none of us here, I'm pretty safe to say none of us follow the radical teachings of Jesus as much as we could. If we did, we'd all be saints. And then it wouldn't be any fun. We are really called to go beyond ourselves. The immigration issue is really tough. It's the woman who put her country before her church. Her country before her faith, I should say, would be a better way. Benedict XVI said, faith informs politics. In other words, our faith helps us make decisions about politics. What you find in 21st century America is politics informs faith. People who try to use their politics that they believe in, they try to make their faith fit that. So that's a challenge. That's a challenge for all of us to live the gospel values. And believe me, I know I don't live all the gospel values as much as I think I should. That's why we have reconciliation, because we're all sinful, and we have there's individual sin and there's social sin as well, social sin that we all participate in. So another good workshop. How can cultures find a common ground in the social justice field? I'd say by agreeing on the general principles of the faith. The general principle is that life is important. So if we all agree that life is important, then we could work together on that. If we all agree that people have a responsibility to provide for themselves and their family, then how do we make that happen? We could make that happen if we get together and talk about it reasonably and don't have what's called a zero-sum game in politics. I win, you lose type game. It's not easy. I'm not trying to pretend this is all easy. But that's something I think we're called to do. And I realize that we're at the time, and I'm giving these are very good questions. They're very complicated. I'm sort of breezing through them. So you got my number and email if you want to talk some more about them, and I'll be around for a little bit. As a Latino, I noticed that our Latino Catholic community is very tolerant or pro-choice in the life dignity issues, but very vocal when the issues hit closer to home, such as immigration or programs for the poor. How do we help Catholics understand that life issues are just as important as social and economic issues? You come to work for us, that's our job. You know, Cardinal McCarrick, who used to be the Cardinal for Washington, D.C., he said, as Catholics, we are all pro-choice, but that is not enough. So you have to start with that, but you have to go beyond that as well. So a Catholic who's not pro-life, you need to really kind of understand what the church is teaching and whether, you know, do you understand that well enough to make an informed decision on that? But that's not enough, because we can't stop when the baby's born. We can't stop caring for the individual. You know, we tell on the abortion issue, we say the life is just as precious, you know, in the womb as when it gets out. So why don't we act as if the life is precious when it gets out? You know, these very, very complicated issues. I know I'm giving them short shrift here, but thank you very much. I'll stick around and answer any questions I can.